Hi, and welcome to this Learning and Skills Group Google Hangout on mindfulness with me, Don Taylor, the chairman of the Learning and Skills Group, and we've got Alex Watson. You're going to be handling all the questions which are coming through. We've already got questions coming through, so Alex is going to be on her toes, and of course our guest, David Gellis, who's the author of Mindful Work. The production comes to you in collaboration with DreamTech, who are our production partners. Before we kick off chatting with David, I'd just quickly like to say a couple of things. If you're watching this live, rather than the recording, if you're watching it live, then you will be able to ask questions if you've signed in with a Google Plus account. If you haven't, you can still watch the questions and of course still listen to the interview, but you won't be able to ask questions. That's fine. In the future, perhaps you might want to think about getting a Google Plus account. Given our response to the feedback, we may choose to run some more of these sessions. It would be great to have you involved. After all, we always say that the wisdom of the crowds and the bringing of people together really helps all of us learn from these events. So I look forward to more of these in the future. Now, David, over to you. See, you've got your book propped up here, Mindful Work. Let's get that to prominence. But mindfulness is something we associate with meditation, with Buddhism, with slightly fringe activities. You're a guy in a suit. You're a journalist for the New York Times. How did you come to write this book and what's it about? What's the story?
Well, mindfulness does indeed involve a real contemplative practice, but that's not something that necessarily needs to be relegated to the meditation hall.
Right.
It's something that's applicable and is being used in professions from technology to finance to sports and beyond, healthcare.
Right.
And it's something that I've had a personal relationship with for more than 15 years.
Right.
So I was a long-haired kid. I did go off to India. I did spend some time in the monasteries. But then I came back and I got on with my life and I became a business journalist for the FT, wrote for Forbes before that. I'm now at the New York Times covering mergers and acquisitions. And what I found at a personal level is that mindfulness, in fact, is an enormously powerful technique that helps me get through the days with a lot more ease, compassion, grace than maybe if I wasn't practicing.
Right.
And it's something that I'm seeing through this reporting of the book is happening across all these other professions, and others are finding that it makes them less stressed, more focused, and again, kinder and more compassionate to themselves and to others.
Well, that's interesting. So in the book, you talk about and you spend some time going across the States looking at different organizations, from General Mills, huge organizations, through to quite small organizations that are using mindfulness. Can you give us a couple of examples where it was used and it was effective?
Well, that's right. It's happening at the smallest of small companies to the biggest corporations in the world and everywhere in between. Right. And because of that, there's a real range of applications and a range of different ways that it shows up. So I'll start maybe at the biggest level.
Sure.
You mentioned General Mills.
Yeah.
The deputy general counsel at that company was the first real advocate. She had a personal relationship. She started teaching some of her closest colleagues. And all of a sudden, you see some of the leaders at this Fortune 200 company, $14 billion in revenue a year, started to change the way that they interact with each other and their subordinates and their staff. And what they found was that the people that did the program there were more able to stay on task, were able to not switch between activities, and were able to prioritize what they did in any given day much better than they did before the mindfulness. But I'd say that the real impact showed up just in the response. I spent some time in Minneapolis, and the people that I met there said that they genuinely had kinder, more accepting, more caring relationships with their colleagues. And I think that, even more so than the productivity benefits, is pretty remarkable in a big Fortune 500 company.
It is, and I think it's great to hear, because we always associate large organizations with being fairly soulless. They don't have to be, clearly. But a lot of people would say it's a bit difficult to get our hands around. So two hard questions here, or two questions I think we need to get boiled down to. Firstly, what is mindfulness? Because we've already had one question, haven't we, Alex, saying what is mindfulness? Can we have a definition, please? By the way, we have 130 people online at the moment throwing questions at us, and the numbers keep rising. And so, Alex, you're just going to have your socks worked off, keeping track of this. First one, what is mindfulness? Yeah. Second one is, okay, what about the numbers? Can we actually say in hard scientifically proven ways that this has had a measurable effect.
Yeah.
Both, I mean, I know there are some medical instances,
Sure.
also perhaps some business instances. So firstly, what is mindfulness?
Sure. So mindfulness, the most commonly cited definition is that mindfulness is paying attention on purpose and in a particular way and non-judgmentally. And that's critical, that last
Right.
piece. And that extends to our thoughts,
Uh-huh.
our emotions, our sensations. And it's been proven over time that the most reliable way to cultivate mindfulness is through meditation. So that's why you often hear about mindfulness meditation.
Uh-huh.
So that's the broadest definition. But mindfulness means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And it all does come back to that, though, that non-judgmental, that acceptance, accepting what's happening in ourselves rather than having some stimulus come at us and start to freak out and overreact and respond in poor ways.
So for example, there's a truck reversing outside with a very loud beeping noise, but I'm completely calm about that because I'm totally focused on what you're saying. I'm not freaking out.
Well, you have the opportunity there, right?
Right.
You have the choice on how to respond.
And
So are you going to let the beeping bother you? Are you going to react and say, oh, that it's screwing up our
and there's
webcast?
this great quote, isn't there, about pain and suffering. What is it?
So we all feel pain. We don't all have to suffer. And that's really where mindfulness has the opportunity to make a big difference in our lives and the lives of others, is can we make that choice moment to moment to not react with aversion, but instead to have a sort of gentle acceptance of what's happening.
Right.
So I hope that helps give a sense of what mindfulness is.
Okay.
As for the results, the scientific data over the last few decades is really extraordinary. There's neuroscience, there's clinical science, there's psychology.
Yeah.
People have been coming at it from every which way. And I'll just cite maybe a few examples that could help give us some grounding. So classic study out of Harvard, they looked at the brains of mindfulness meditators and they put them in fMRIs before and after.
Very quickly, fMRIs.
Functional magnetic resonance imaging, essentially giving us a real-time picture as to what parts of the brain are active at any given moment when certain things are happening. And what they found was this. In the prefrontal cortex, which is evolutionarily the most recent part of our brains, it's the part that essentially other animals don't have. It's where our higher order processing happens, our thinking, our reasoning. Executive function. The prefrontal cortex in the minds of meditators not only was more active during the act of meditation, but in fact developed gray matter. In other words, the muscles of our mind got stronger over the course of a 10-week meditation course. Not only that, when they measured it a month later, 2 months later, the gray matter had stayed. So not only were the effects immediate, but they were lasting.
That's extraordinary. And I remember a study from the book, which I've been privileged to read. The book comes out, by the way, in January of next year, January 2015, but I've managed to get a pre-publication copy. There was a story about Galveston, and some of the nurses and doctors in a medical facility there went through a course of mindfulness. A year later, Hurricane Ike hit. They still found they're able to respond far more calmly, if you like, to that instance because of their mindfulness training. And also they found that they went back and did some research on how their brains had evolved. And indeed, they were still, I believe, benefiting from the effects of that stuff they'd done a year earlier. Extraordinary.
And some of these people, of course, have kept up their practice.
Right.
And it's important to note that mindfulness is no panacea.
Right.
It's not going to give us superpowers. It doesn't mean we don't have to sleep. And yet it does seem to have really meaningful and lasting changes on the brain and our bodies.
Right. Speaking about change on the body, coming back to the brain, because you have a whole chapter about the brain. I noticed a couple of things that our audience would be particularly interested in, I'm sure. Can you just talk through some of the other changes that might take place in the mind that they've been clinically proven as a result of, let's say, meditation and mindfulness?
I'll mention two, one in the brain and one in the body, because I think it's important to recognize that this isn't just about being in our heads. It's really about being more embodied in the physical bodies we have. So in the brain, we're all stressed, right? And when we get stressed, we all know that feeling of adrenaline coursing through our brain, our bodies, and our chest gets a little tighter. And what's happening there's scientific stuff happening, right? Cortisol, the stress hormone, is flowing through our brain. And in our brain, the amygdala, little seahorse-shaped part in the center of our brain, is flaring up. It's releasing all these hormones. And what they found is in the minds of mindfulness meditators, the amygdala responds less severely to stress reactions. So that fight or flight reaction that we have when we get stressed, it's more subdued in those that practice meditation. So there's less cortisol flowing through our brains, our bodies, and that allows us in the moment to make more gentle responses, to not overreact, to not hit back if someone in the office is lashing out at us. And that, I think, is a pretty profound transformation indeed. If we can be a little softer, a bit more reluctant to lash back.
It gives us the opportunity to choose.
It does. It gives you that choice. So yeah, you're feeling pain, but are you going to continue to suffer yourself by dwelling in it? Are you going to inflict suffering on others because that's what we're trained to do? Or are you going to pause, let that moment pass, and be on with your day? Now, in the body, there was a great study that was done several years ago about those who suffered psoriasis, the skin ailment. And what they found was that took a big group of people who had psoriasis. Some people did the light box treatment, which is kind of pretty standard therapy to try to cure it.
Ultraviolet.
Exactly. And so someone on the control group did the treatment as usual. The other group did the same treatment, but was listening to mindfulness meditation instruction at the time of it and continued to practice the treatment. And I mean, these results seem too good to be true, but they're verified up in town. The group that was practicing mindfulness healed much faster than those that weren't.
About 3 times faster.
It's a classic example of mind over matter.
Yeah. Absolutely. And of course, one final thing from the brain, I did notice in the book that it was verified that people who've been undergoing meditation / mindfulness training, the hippocampus, which is essential for learning and for memory, got increased density of neurons. So that if we're interested in learning, as I know a lot of the audience are, then that's got to be something of interest to us. Look, I could sit here talking all day, but it's not fair on Alex, who's sitting here desperately fielding the questions. It's not fair on everybody out there. Alex, what questions have we got coming through?
Well, we've got loads of questions coming through. This is a very practical one. Frank Kalberg, hi Frank, asks,
hi Frank.
What are 3 very practical ways of being mindful?
Not just 1, but 3.
3. I'll do my best here. As I mentioned, the most tried and true way to cultivate mindfulness is through meditation practice. And so for those interested, I would encourage you to find some way to learn. And there's a variety of ways. Headspace is a great app that you can download where a great British guy named Andy Puttycombe advocates and really walks you through step by step how to practice mindfulness. There's mindfulness-based stress reduction, and I know that there are a lot of MBSR courses here in London and around the world. But on a practical level, 3 tips. I think just pausing in that moment. When you notice a stress response, taking that moment and checking in with your body before you respond. Checking in with your brain, your body, the things around you. Just that purposeful pause before you respond, I think, is enormously helpful. I do it when I pick up the telephone. So when the telephone rings, what do? We grab for it and we reach it up. Who is it? What's going on? When my telephone rings, I can't do this every moment, but I try most days. I let it ring 3 times, which is an anomaly in a newsroom. What are you doing? Someone's going to be called. But I try to check in with myself. What's my intention with this call? How do I feel? And that moment of kind of getting in touch with myself allows me to respond a bit more authentically and a bit more compassionately. Another way is mindful eating. Now, it's hard. I eat lunch at my desk a lot, but pausing to actually notice the tastes, good taste, bad taste. It's not about savoring it necessarily, but actually just slowing down rather than mindlessly shoveling food into my face so I can get to the next event. Actually cultivates that awareness that we're talking about, which in time can lead to much more kind of humane interactions with your colleagues.
Very good. And of course, that sort of chimes with the slow food movement, which started in Italy. Although you referred to London here, we've got plenty of people from the UK, but actually I know that online we've got Frank, I think it's in Switzerland. I was on the Mail on the tube with people from Australia trying to get in. So we've got people all over the world listening in. Anybody else?
Yeah, loads. This one's from Norman Boyd. It says, I'd be interested in knowing how to present the concept to a cynical workforce who feel it's all on their side. They have to improve all the time.
It's a terrific question. And a lot of people say meditation has a public relations problem. My friend Dan Harris over in the US, he coined that line, and he couldn't be more right. There's still a hurdle to get over here. And mindfulness may still have some cultural baggage. But I would point you towards the experiences of some of those people that have been able to scale mindfulness in their own workplaces. So we mentioned General Mills earlier. General Mills is not the most likely place. This is the Midwest, it's a big corporate culture. But how, you might ask, did they find a big audience internally? Well, it started with one woman. And when one woman started to change her own behaviors, and this woman who, had at times been low energy, brusque, drained, started responding differently, people started asking, well, what's going on? And it was from that it snowballed, and now there are hundreds of people across the organization practicing. So I would say practice yourself.
Yes.
And when people start to notice a change in you, and they say, well, what's going on? You can say, well, one of the things is mindfulness.
That's a good point. And you mentioned in your book a basketball coach who held back on revealing about his mindfulness for a long time, and did to a senator, because they both felt that it wasn't going to be right to share that with people, and yet it was tremendously powerful in their lives.
Yeah, there are a lot of closet meditators out there. And I should say, it's not necessarily appropriate that mindfulness should be taught in every organization. The businesses large to small, there's such a wide spectrum of different sorts of organizations and different sorts of corporate cultures. I'm not sitting here saying that everyone should meditate and that there should be meditation cushions in every office. That's far too ambitious. I think it's most important that if individuals can find ways to internalize it and change the way that they respond, I think that's where the real change is going to happen.
That leads us up to this question that I found here, actually, which, where is it? It says, okay.
I'll just ask a quick question.
Yeah,
Were you a
go on.
closet meditator?
Disappeared.
For a time I was. When I was at the Financial Times, not everyone knew about this. It was really when I wrote the article, The Mind Business, in 2012, that people said, oh, what? How are you interested in this? And then my personal story got revealed. But no, indeed, I had my personal practice and I had my work life. And for most of 15 years, those were two very separate things. And it's only really in the last few years that I think the culture has been accepting enough that I can come out and say, no, I practice mindfulness meditation. And yeah, I'm an M&A reporter too.
That was the question. It was from Ken Armstrong. He said, does personality type or preference make it easier to be mindful?
That's a good question.
I don't know, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to. There are a lot of different personality types, and inevitably, I think some people may be more inclined towards this practice. And I'm not sure if, Ken, you're asking about a specific personality paradigm, so I'm be careful here. But let me say this. I know very gregarious people who are mindfulness, or who are mindful and who have deep meditation practices, and I know real introverts who are equally so. So I think there's something here for everyone. It just might be reflected slightly differently.
And you don't have to be necessarily out of tune with the world or not be a successful business person. In fact, what I was very impressed by in the book was the number of people who were very successful, go-getting sports people, politicians and others who had found that they were driving themselves into the ground, trying to maintain the pace of life they're at, but that mindfulness had helped them actually maintain their success, but at less personal cost.
And this is one of the great paradoxes here, because when we talk about mindfulness, we talk about letting go of some of our constant appetite for success. We talk about being more accepting of things as they are. And yet, this isn't to say that we can't be ambitious and that we can't be really successful. And one of the things that's so interesting with mindfulness going mainstream and mindfulness infiltrating the workplace is how these principles of acceptance are being reconciled with the fact that indeed we lead very busy lives, we're very ambitious, and we've got a lot to do. And so the two are not at all incompatible.
Okay, we've got here, hi Alex, Donald, David, great hangout. And this is from Celine Mullins. Can you recommend mindfulness for athletes?
Well, yes, but I don't need to do the recommending. You need only ask people like Phil Jackson, the coach of the Chicago Bulls and the Los Angeles Lakers. He used mindfulness training to help the likes of Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant not only become more present in their own minds and bodies while they were on the court, but also at times to become better teammates. Now, was it perfect? No. These guys, they're big athletes and they got big egos. But on the margins, they said that it made a positive difference. John Kabat-Zinn, the grandfather of mindfulness, if you will, I think it was 1984, he trained the Olympic men's rowing team. Right. And they had very good results. And there's nascent research that shows that in other types of sports, from archery to wrestling, mindfulness can perhaps help athletes be more focused. Now, is it going to win you that medal? I'm not here to claim that, but it can, I believe, help athletes be a bit more accepting in the moment, and maybe instead of dwelling on that last missed shot, kind of let that go and on to the next shot.
Okay, this is from Rob Hubbard. Hi, Rob. It says, can you share any evidence of the effect of meditation on creativity levels, please?
So there's fertile overlap between mindfulness and the arts, but I'll confess that's not something I spent a lot of time researching in the book. No. So rather than me try to direct you to some studies that I don't really know exactly where, I'd say maybe for the next book.
Oh.
Okay. Joanna Corey asks, time equals money. How do you persuade businesses to pay for their people to have time to think and to be mindful instead of responding in a finger-snapping, knee-jerk reacting way?
That's a great question. And it's right at the heart of this tension between how are we going to allow a reflective, contemplative practice in for-profit companies? And I'd respond a few ways. One is that if we think about mindfulness as something that, as a side product, might make people a bit more focused, well, you got to look at the long-term results there. And if indeed, as studies suggest, those that practice mindfulness are able to stay on task in a way that those that aren't are, then I think there's probably a long-term investment thesis there. The other thing I would say is that there's also the potential for reduced healthcare costs. So at Aetna, the big health insurer in the United States, they rolled out mindfulness and yoga to thousands of employees across the workforce. And what did they find? The next year, that was the only thing that really changed that year. But right. The next year, healthcare costs at the company were down substantially. Right. And so are we saying mindfulness is going to have a real ROI or that it's going to boost the bottom line? I think we've got to be careful about not overpromising. Okay. And yet there's nascent evidence to suggest that in terms of productivity, in terms of reduced healthcare costs, there is potentially some really exciting applications here.
And just back to attentiveness, there was that great study about the University of Washington, I think it was, looking at HR professionals, finding that they were able far better to concentrate on the tasks they were doing.
That's right.
After a short period of mindfulness training.
We all multitask. We all, bouncing around from one thing to the next to the next. This study up in Seattle took office workers. They put them in a fake office in a laboratory, and they told them to complete a series of tasks over the course of the hour. And what they found is that the meditators didn't necessarily do anything faster. Again, this isn't going to give you some superpower that's going to let you do all your work by 3 p.m. But they found that the meditators, those exposed to meditation, did one thing at a time. Yeah. They did fewer things per minute. And you got to believe that in time, that's going to allow workers to be much more focused.
Less task switching, more quality. Yeah, fantastic. Alex, we've got 200 people online, I think, at the moment.
Wow. Okay, well, Catherine Hickey just says, she quotes Viktor E. Frankl and says, between stimulus and response, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response.
Wow.
In our response lies our growth and freedom. So I thought that was excellent. But there's a question here then.
That's a wonderful quote, by the way. I know it. Yeah.
And it's from Claudine Deprez, and she says, do you have any tips for being mindful when under extreme pressure, someone shouting in your face, so that you don't react in the same manner?
It's the real test of this practice, and this is why we practice, because I remember very vividly while I was writing this book, while I was keeping up a very strong meditation practice at the time, someone screamed at me in the office.
Really?
I got it was a really, happens very rarely. It's the last time it happened. This is 2 years ago now, but a colleague got very upset at me and was really up in my face, and I did not respond as skillfully as I wish I had.
Right.
I didn't scream back, but I didn't bring my best self to the equation either. So mindfulness isn't gonna make us perfect. And I regret that in this one moment, I took the bait. And yet in moments since then, I haven't been screamed at, but there have been tense moments and people have confronted me. And I've really tried with that moment in mind to remember to take a deep breath, to remember what it is I'm trying to accomplish in that moment. And in that moment of reflection, recognize that whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish, fighting back is not going to achieve that goal. And it's helped on the margins. Again, mindfulness isn't going to make that person not scream at you, but we can only hope that it allows us to have a bit more gracious, a bit gentler response to ourselves and to others.
There's going to be a spectrum of occasions you find yourself in. There'll be always some that are insupportable, but in the middle there will be some which the mindfulness will make a difference and give you that ability to choose at that moment, what's my reaction going to be, rather than the amygdala taking over and giving that rush of adrenaline or cortisol that's going to force you to, not force you, but it's going to make it much more difficult to have a good reaction.
But that's why we keep practicing. That's why we have to maintain our practice, and why this is a lifelong journey. This isn't something you learn on an afternoon and that's the end of the story.
We could keep talking about this for a very long time. We only have half an hour, and the half hour is wrapping up now. We must have a slew of questions we haven't answered. I do apologize to everyone who's online right now and wanting their question answered. I'm going to ask David a question which he doesn't know about yet. David, will it be possible to do a webinar or something at some point in the future where we can get you to chat again online to people, not necessarily coming together face to face, but perhaps you can do it from your home in Washington, on the East Coast?
Whatever I can do to help.
That'd be fantastic. So let's see if we can get those questions answered in the future. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's been online, has been putting the questions in. If you're watching the recording, then we'll put a note in the recording notes as to where you can get the next webinar or the next chance to see David. I want to thank Alex for doing a great job of fielding all those questions and coming up with the best ones. Thank you, Alex. And of course, thank David for such a great job in bringing his thinking and his experience and his research to us. Before I wrap up, very quickly then, don't forget that David is talking at Learning Technologies in January 2015, and we look forward to seeing David there. And if you want to come along, that's great. And of course, his book, Mindful Work, is available, will be available from January when it's published in the UK, and you can pre-order it. I think the URLs will come up now in the question area, and also they should be appearing on the screen now. Thanks very much for being with us. Looking forward to hopefully running some more of these in the future. But until we meet again, thanks very much and keep learning. Thank you very much, guys. It was a good job altogether.